Howdy, I'm Jammer. So, before we begin, as always, please remember that I've started a Patreon. It helps with my YouTube channel, it helps with my art. Food is expensive, rent is expensive. Out of print comics that are hard to find and you can only track them down on eBay are also really expensive. And best of all, on my Patreon, there's only a $1 tier donation, $1 a month, every month over the course of a year, or even just a one-time donation of $1. A few pennies in my cup is all I ask. And if you offer me a few pennies, I'll be immensely appreciative. Now, what is the difference between a signal and a noise? Now, that question may seem kind of familiar because I've asked it before, and when I did ask it, it was for this book here, Signal to Noise, by Neil Gaiman and Dave McKean. Now, this is one of three big books that Dave McKean and Neil Gaiman have written principally for Dark Horse magazine. One of the other ones, of course, being Violent Cases, and then, of course, the third one being the comical tragedy or tragical comedy of Mr. Punch. I've done Signal to Noise, and I haven't sat down yet to read Violent Cases or Mr. Punch. Well, I've read Mr. Punch and Violent Cases, but I need to sit down and read them again before I talk about them here on the channel. But Signal to Noise was kind of hitting me lately, and honestly, I don't know why. Part of it is because at the time of this taping, COVID-19 is still a thing, despite the immunizations, despite people not wearing masks. The United States alone has stopped over 600,000 people dead. And then, I suppose on a more personal level as well, the last year and a half has kind of been a bitch. Because in the space of a year, I had a divorce, and then I had 2 months of isolation, and then several long months of having to tell grown adults to please, 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 wear a mask. It's been a long year, emotionally, psychologically, physically, and honestly, I don't feel like I'm anywhere close to being the same man that I was 2 years ago. Now, that may just be me being a depressed, moody, dour sort of fellow already, but honestly, there feels like there's been a real change, and whenever I think of change, I think of death. And when you talk about Signal to Noise, this book is a really interesting exploration of life and death, and ultimately how death, whether it be figurative or metaphorical, can have a dramatic consequence to the way we go about our lives. Now, I've done this video before in a very long-form video once already. You can find it on the home channel, and there's, I believe, a playlist now for Dave McKean. It should be the very first one there. Just go there, watch it if you want to, and it should give you the whole layout. But the general gist, narratively speaking, of Signal to Noise is that a longtime movie director is making plans to direct his next film, which is set in the year 999 AD. That year was really important because in that year there was a lot of millenarian sentiment. Now, what does that mean? It means that there were a lot of people who thought that when the year 1000 came, Jesus would return and the world would end. People would be punished for their sins. It would be an apocalypse. The world, effectively, was going to die. And this created a lot of panic. And in the same time, while this director is about to start making this film, he's diagnosed with stage 4 cancer and is given just a couple of months to live. At that moment, his life is permanently changed, and the entire book focuses on the last few months of his life while he's sitting there thinking about this film. Now, if you want the full story of how Signal to Noise came to be, my edition of it, this hardback edition, has a nice little introduction by Dave McKean himself, which actually talks about how this book came to be. Reading it, it can be very episodic. The stories are broken up into about 11 chapters, and some of these chapters are maybe 2 or 3 pages long. And so reading this book, it doesn't always feel like a clear and consistent narrative. And so I thought to myself, you know, it might be fun just tackling 1 or 2 of the chapters in little videos and posting them to the channel because, you know, sometimes people don't want to watch me talk in front of a camera for half an hour and occasionally change the books out. So, today's video is going to be the first. It may be the last, but whatever the case, I'm trying something. And so today's video is going to be principally about Chapter 1 of Signal to Noise, the Prelude. Now, chapter 1 begins at first with the director kind of imagining the story, the setting place to be specific, and he describes the people of a small village in Europe who are walking up the side of a mountain. And you'll note, too, at the very beginning of it, Dave McKean splits up the page into this beautiful grid. Now, part of this is so that he can have a little bit of a back and forth in terms of the dialogue as well, but often there's a strategy in this book of using this grid to break up single images, so that something like this hawk, which is carrying what appears to be a ring at the start, is broken up. So, effectively, you have these two little lines, and then it becomes these several lines. We get the face of the bird then, and then suddenly it turns into the edge of a wing. This is a little choice, but the title Signal to Noise has a rhetorical function. The book is about how exactly people differentiate between a signal and a noise. Now, what does that mean? If something is a signal to you, it means of some form or fashion you recognize it. Very basic symbol. ... dash, 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 ... If you grew up and went to the Boy Scouts, or if you have any military training, or even if you've just casually watched one or two little murder mysteries, you've probably eventually learned that ... dash, 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 ... is Morse code for SOS, which is usually a kind of universal symbol for help, I'm in trouble, please come save me. A noise would be something like I'm never doing that again. But I did that for an effect. That noise that I just made and will never make again, thankfully, my audience says, wiping a bead of sweat from their brow, is different than ... dash, 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 ... Because SOS is a signal. It is a clear message. Whereas that rambling sound is empty noise. It doesn't convey anything. It doesn't say anything. When we talk about art, we are ultimately talking about a collection of small symbols, a collection of images that create meaning within the viewer. And when we talk about film directors especially, we talk about somebody who assembles a lot of images together and tries to form them into some kind of message, aka some kind of signal. And so one of the interesting things at the very one of these things that's interesting is that at the very beginning, the first passages of the book are an attempt to sort of show you how very quickly a signal can be broken up seemingly into noise. And then as we go forward, we move from the description of these villagers ascending the side of the mountain to what appears to be some kind of daytime television interview talk show where the director is talking about his creativity and his motivations. He's being interviewed by various reporters. Why choose to make films? Yes, simply put, I don't have a choice. I mean, I sketch and paint occasionally, but film is an obsession. When you're driven to do something, there's no choice involved. You'll carry on regardless of the pain and frustration and stupidity and bullshit until you drop. You say you can make the films in your head before you shoot them. Yes. Have you ever been pleasantly surprised by the finished film? Not really. Probably because I know how far they are from what I had in my head. That's where the real films are. Then I put them on paper, and finally I have to shoot them, to put them out of their misery. What will your next film be about? The end of the world. And there's a little bit more back and forth, but that sort of narration alone is, again, a way in which we're sort of determining or discussing the difference between what is a signal to us and what is noise. Because especially when we're talking about something like creativity, the ideas that somebody can have in their head, and if I may use my own role as a creative, as some kind of ethos here, again, I have tons of ideas in my head, and I do my very best to write them down, to draw them down, to make them into some kind of real reality. And a lot of times I fail miserably, like he says. And honestly, this is where you get into a lot of really interesting philosophy, and I would definitely point you towards Plato's Republic, or even just Plato himself, because he has a lot of conversations about this, especially in regards to sort of the ideal forms and the way we translate them into reality. Anyway, that's getting off point. What's important here is that creatively speaking, the noise of just inspiration or ideas can sometimes be really frustrating, because oftentimes creativity is an effort to take the noise that is in our head and form it into some mode of signal. And it doesn't even have to be necessarily creativity, because not but a few panels later, a reporter asks him, "How long do you have to live?" You'll see here at this moment, he makes a face that, is almost meme-worthy. But then the next shot is interesting, because the reporter's head has turned into this falcon-like bird. And we get the line that says, a couple of months. At that moment, it seems at first just like a little, okay, this reporter's just being a dick. We've seen something like this in movies, or television, or books before, but honestly, we've probably seen it in real life too, or at least I have. There are individuals who will offer a sentence, and in that sentence is always a kind of hidden level, a hidden layer, or a hidden message. Even though it's very, very subtle, that question, how long do you have to live, is a signal nonetheless. This reporter is trying to look for weakness. He's effectively a predator looking for some kind of prey. Now, of course, we also have to point out that this mimics, at the same time, this predator bird sort of attacking the director with this bird here at the start. Again, creating a kind of almost diagonal, just a diagonal line across the page as we move from one predator moving back down to the next representation. It's a little interesting thing visually that I'm like, oh, that's pretty cool. And now I've turned into Leonardo DiCaprio. Oh. Anyway, there's only 4 more pages left of the Prelude. The director effectively wakes up, and in this gorgeous layout, you can see one of the reasons why I make it my life's work to try to buy absolutely everything that Dave McKean, puts out in terms of books. But we discover that that was a little bit of a dream, or perhaps it was a memory of some kind. And then it moves over here into this section where we see the X-ray, and we get a small internal monologue. Now, throughout Signal to Noise, the director's internal monologue is usually just text on the page. There's nothing to kind of divide it from the rest of the book. It's only when we see word balloons that we begin to actually recognize that these are actual events and not just, meditations taking place in his head. Again, contributing a nice little visual metaphor for the difference between signals and noises. Nevertheless, the diagnosis of it's possibly a tumor, it's probably malignant, how long do I have? Again, when we talk about mortality and life, our life is often a form of navigating these little moments that can honestly have a lot more big implications than just about anything else in the world. Going to the doctor and hearing the words, we didn't catch it, but we need to act now. That is a signal, and a powerful signal at that, because at that moment, it's effectively the body going ... It's an important signal, and it's a signal nonetheless because it recognizes and pushes us towards the recognition of our own mortality. Now, narratively speaking, after that, we get this really nice full-page spread, and I really hope you can see how big this book is in relation to me. I'm small. Oh, not really, just ask my girlfriend. But you'll see, this is a full long-page ad to show him just sitting in his chair with a book, seemingly complacent. But then we move back here to the film that he's making in his head, and he's describing these figures in the village moving up to the mountain. And I'll read just a couple of little things, because at first it seems like he's just sort of telling the scene, but actually he's telling us something else. I'm making a film in my head, assembling the actors, setting up the shots. I'm not writing anything down. Anno Domini 999, the last day of the last month of the year. It's winter in Middle Europe. I've left the place unspecified. A small town in the shadow of a mountain. We pan in slowly. It's like an ant's nest as they run in circles, gathering up their possessions, food, children. We see their faces, rich, poor, old, fat, mad. Some stand and scoff, then they too begin to be affected by the others and the utter conviction that at last it's here, that it's come. Perhaps a flurry of snow comes across our vision like a burst of noise disrupting a frozen video image, and when we see again, they are walking away from us. Perhaps they are leaving the village. They are going up to the high place to wait there for the end of their world, and here in my room, I will be 50 soon. I wonder if I will see that birthday, if I will be here to celebrate. all alone, I'm going with them. So, at this moment, narratively speaking, the director has made his intention clear. He's going to just sit here and use the last months of his life to make a film inside of his head. He's not going to commit anything to paper. He's not going to bother to move forward with the production or set anything in place so that it could continue after him. He's instead elected to make a movie inside of his head. And narratively speaking, that sets up the rest of the book, but I really hope I can bring attention to this last page here, because whenever we see the actual villagers and their story inside of his head, it's often in this cold blue environment. It gives us a nice sort of sad or morose quality. I mean, then again, they think it's the apocalypse, so that's kind of on point and on brand. But just as important, too, is the way that in these last few panels, we see the snow begin to sort of divide us from the figures in question, and at the very end, it turns into static. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean much anymore in an age of smart TVs, but anybody who at least grew up when I was younger knows that when you originally turned on the TV, before you turned on your cable box, or before you put VHS in the tape, and yes, in fact, I am that old, oi, you had static. It was just this empty black and white noise that would just be going, and I'm sure somebody who actually studied electrical engineering and radio broadcasts could explain it far better than I can, but basically all that was kind of the absence of radio waves, or just simply put, your televised signal. And so what's really interesting to me is that it's another way, again, of demonstrating that while this director is considering his own mortality, and while he's considering this film that he's making, at the same time, he's constantly battling between what are the signals in his head and what is the noise. And how is he going to rectify the two as he moves forward? Because as his time is precious, he doesn't have time for the noise of his life. He can only focus on the signals because, well, I guess we'll just have to figure that out when we move on through the rest of the book. And I guess with that, yeah, we're called a day there. So, thank you so much for watching. I tremendously appreciate it. Again, the book is Signal to Noise by Neil Gaiman and Dave McKean. I really hope you continue watching this with me. I don't know when I'll be getting to Chapter 2, assuming I get to Chapter 2 at all. I'm actually about to restart reading Fun Home pretty soon, so that may actually take precedence. But as soon as I do the next chapters, I will make sure to post them here, and then I'll hopefully eventually gather them all up into a playlist of some kind. But whatever the case, thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. Lets me know that you like these videos. It lets YouTube know that you like my videos and that, maybe we want to see more. Please also remember, like I said at the start, there is a Patreon for this channel. $1 a month. That's all I ask. When it comes to Signal to Noise, again, this book is currently out of print, unfortunately. And Dark Horse, I'm not going to say that they're on hard times, but the odds of them putting this book out again anytime soon are very unlikely. Try their website first. Try Dave McKean's website or Neil Gaiman's website, because you may be able to pick up a paperback through their site. If you can't get it there, try your local comic book shop, because they may be able to find an old issue of it in their old their back room, or maybe in their graphic novel section. And then also, as always, don't forget, you live in a world with public libraries. So go to your public library, check out the graphic novel section, and if they don't have a graphic novel section, well, just ask for an interlibrary loan form, and they'll be happy to help you out. And I know I keep saying it over and over again, but really, 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 just thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Go read some comics.